Well, welcome everyone to the third webinar in our HR Masterclass series. My name is Dr. Peter Race. I'll be your host for today. So let's move on to our next slide. So this is the agenda for today, and believe it or not, e-learning actually started in the 60s. Like all new technology, e-learning experienced exponential growth in the years leading up to COVID-19. And we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about how e-learning accelerated and evolved during that crisis. But it's interesting, regardless of all this development, e-learning in general still leaves a lot to be desired. So we're going to introduce the concept of collaborative e-learning, which when applied properly can provide a profound outcome and a fantastic return on investment. Finally, we're going to discuss a number of collaborative e-learning platforms which are in the market today. And then we're going to introduce our fantastic panel who have an enormous depth and breadth of experience in this area. So let's move on to our next slide. So prior to COVID-19, what was the situation with e-learning then? Well, in 2019, the global e-learning market was predicted to grow from 144 billion US dollars to 374 billion by 2026. And with COVID-19, as you can imagine, that rate of growth is going to be much steeper, much faster. Prior to COVID-19, though, the vast majority of e-learning was static type access to online content. There are a lot of claims about interactivity, but this was just interacting with a platform rather than interacting with real people. That's the realm of the MOOC, massively online open courses. And 19 years ago, Time magazine called 2012 the year of the MOOC. But today, they generally have completion rates under 10% because they're less engaging and less successful in sustaining the interest of the learners. So let's now look at e-learning during COVID with our next slide. Thanks. So during COVID-19, there was a sudden and intense exodus of traditional training to a virtual platform. And I'm sure, like pretty much everyone else, you would have used Zoom, GoToMeeting, Google Hangout, and those were the most popular ways of delivering training, just to move from in-class to online using a platform. But instructors started to call this, or many trainers started to call this instructor-led training. The vast majority of them were just run as webinars, though, with many boasting the number of participants into the hundreds. But the reality is there's not much more value to this than watching a video on YouTube. Some try to run smaller groups with breakout rooms, and there are actually some cool collaborative games that you can play virtually, but they're pretty rare. And it's a real challenge to run training sessions beyond 2 to 3 hours at a time in this way. It's hard to keep engaged with the participants, hard even to get their cameras turned on. Even if they do turn their cameras on, many of them are still interacting with their phones, multitasking, doing other stuff on their PC or laptop. And believe me, as an educator, that's distracting for the instructor too. So it's far from ideal. But let's move on and talk a bit more about what e-learning is. There's really three elements to collaborative e-learning. And let's look at our next slide because that explains more about what they are. So first, there's online content. Now, ideally, that should be high quality and interactive. And interactivity is actually measured using the Guerra scale. It's a scale of 1 to 10, where basically reading text off a PDF is 1 and a fully immersive VR environment is 10. But that tends to be a subjective measure. And anyway, interactivity is not the only factor in good learning materials and good learning experience. So as well as having online content, the learning is normally done in a restrictive cohort, restricted by numbers and by time. It shouldn't be more than 35 learners. And this is also called a SPOC, or a small private online course, versus the MOOC, which is the large open online course. But because there's interaction, the class should have a fixed start and end date, and generally speaking, a minimum of a week to allow time for proper interaction to develop, and perhaps up to 2 to 3 weeks. But these learners are not restricted in space. They can be anywhere in the world. Thirdly, one of the main elements is that there's an instructor or facilitator who's a subject matter expert. And using the collaborative platform, the instructor can do a number of things. They can guide the learner through the content. They can urge them to complete it. They can encourage them to complete the work. They can catalyze and seed discussions and debates among the learners, so asking questions and encouraging responses. Also, they can do the more traditional assessment tasks, so marking assignments and assessing project work. And they can also, if there's a discussion board, which there really has to be in this kind of collaboration environment, they can seed it with questions, and they can use the discussion board to evaluate exactly how the learners are applying what they learned. So all this learning can be done in an asynchronous manner. So that's where the instructors set up a learning path, and then the students engage with the learning at their own pace. But the instructor can also run some live sessions with the learners to do Q&A, discuss projects, or do particular activities together. So let's move on to our next slide with a few words of caution about this collaborative online learning. As we mentioned before, some trainers or training companies use this term instructor-led training a bit loosely, because there's really little value in running live sessions with such a large number of participants that there can't be interaction. There's also limited value to collaboration, which is peer-to-peer, so collaboration amongst the learners, particularly if it's not facilitated and not mandatory. I mean, there's no point really having a discussion board where discussion is optional and nobody who knows anything about the topic is actually responding to your postings. If it's not facilitated, you might end up with a situation which could be described as the blind leading the blind, or fake news being posted and nobody there to correct it. So let's look at the next slide, which talks about the global sentiment and predicted ideas about growth. So here's a really interesting survey. The answers here are based on the question, what will be hot in workplace learning in 2021? And as you can see from the chart here, the only option that moved up was collaborative learning, which is now at number 2 under reskilling and upskilling. Interesting that the reasons for this include the fall in popularity of webinars, because this might as well be YouTube. Average completion rates of just a one-way learning is around 20 to 30%, very low. Completion rates for MOOCs is even lower than that. But collaborative learning is running at above an 80% completion rate. So 80% of the people who start an eCornell course actually complete it. And compare that to less than 10% for the MOOCs. So it's no wonder that collaborative or social learning has reached number 2 in this survey. Let's move on. So again, what are the reasons why collaborative e-learning is so important and is so becoming so popular? Well, if it's done in a proper manner, as we can see here, it not only allows personalization of the learning, but it allows contextualization, leading to a greater return on investment. Discussion boards or the assignments can be used to get learners to actually share their experiences and particularly to understand how the learning can be applied to improve the outcome of these real world experiences. And because it's done in an asynchronous manner, the instructor can respond individually to each learner. And furthermore, it allows learners who have different levels of understanding on the topics and a different speed of learning to achieve the same outcome as the more advanced learners, who wouldn't be bored by having to follow the level and pace of the less advanced. I mean, really, in practical terms, if you're running a course at average speed, it basically means roughly half of the students are going to get bored and the other half are going to be left behind. So the personalization and contextualization of the learning, plus the ability to help each learner understand and demonstrate a practical application of the learning, that's why you can get a profound return on investment through collaborative e-learning. Let's look at the next slide now about the end game for this. So what is the end game? So surely as an employer, HR function or management allocating budget for training, the outcome has to be that your employee is able to apply the learning to improve the business. Most people don't realize that in a vast majority of traditional learning, there's no assurance that this happens at all. So the tendency is just to tick the box. The employee attended the training, but in traditional learning, you can't actually ensure that they're paying attention, much less acquire the ability to actually apply this learning. And this is a really interesting and a knowledgeable looking graph, but let's make the point here that it's not the result of any empirical research. It's basically our gut feeling, having accumulated many decades in training and development and dealing with many organizations. So what we're looking here in this version of a normal distribution curve is that there's just a small percentage of employees, those to the right here, whose learning motivation is high. If you're lucky and you've hired well, this could be more than 10%. But generally, these are the people who are constantly thinking about how they can improve themselves, and they will actually search themselves for things they can learn. Generally speaking, most of that learning can be found online for free. And what you need to do as a manager or executive is to help these learners find that, allow them to do so, and approve their requests to learn. At the other end of the spectrum, to the left, they're those who are probably maybe more than a third of your employees who we could call never learners. No matter what you do, they're going to resist. At best, they'll attend training because it's at a nice hotel with good catering, and they'll treat it as downtime away from the office and from their clients. I'd suggest investing to trying to change the behavior of these set of employees is not the best use of your time and energy. But the bulk of your employees in the middle here would be passive learners in the sense that they are interested to improve themselves. They have the natural desire to do that, but they need some help and guidance along the way. Some of them might also want to be a bit pampered during the training, looking for convenience and maybe not too much effort. But this is where you should be investing your time and energy in helping these passive learners to be more motivated to learn. And the problem with true collaborative e-learning is that it will probably be hated by the never learners and even by some of the passive learners. So, think of a traditional training environment. Do you think a trainer who's strict about punctuality and attendance and challenges the learners in their class will get a good evaluation? I can tell you, as an educator myself, this is a challenge. So when you provide a training program that's personalized for each learner and actually stretches them and demands that they learn, you might end up with a bad reaction. Just think about how you're going to manage that. Let's look now at some of the platforms that are available for e-learning. There's actually not many collaborative e-learning solutions in the market today. We've done a lot of research, and really these are the ones that we found. It's because it takes a lot more effort and cost to run them, and you can only run them in small cohorts. The online facilitator needs to be a subject matter expert, but they also need the ability to excite and engage learners who are not actually in a physical classroom and not live online. So the approach is not really as scalable as some of the learning offerings in the market today. So from our research, there's really only 4 truly collaborative e-learning platforms that we've found. Get Smarter, the bottom left, is a South African company that has arrangements with more than 70 universities around the world to deliver their content. The platform and instructors are from Get Smarter. eCornell is is the executive education arm of Cornell University in Ithaca, New York State. Everything is controlled and managed by the university, and you get a proper professional certificate from Cornell University itself when you complete a bit of training. Emeritus is similar to Get Smarter, except they run large classes, up to hundreds in one class, and collaboration is not really as intense. And finally, Harvard Business School Online also runs online learning with large cohorts. We're actually going to be sharing more about these platforms in our next webinar on the critical core skills for the future. Let me introduce now the panel. Dr. Daniel Tan established e-learning at Nanyang Technology University, is the former Chief Learning Officer for Taylor's Education Group. Welcome, Dr. Tan. Professor
Hi,
Dr.
hello. Nice meeting you.
Hello. Hello, Dr. Tan. Professor Dr. Vinta Guptani is the Vice Chancellor of Saito University College, former Dean of Taylor's Business School.
Hi,
Welcome,
Peter.
Professor Dr.
Hi, everyone.
Gupta. And Yao Chang Lian is the former Director of Learning at Motorola, a PME and APAC, and has held learning and development roles with Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Lotus, IBM, and Sun Microsystems. Welcome, Cheng Lian.
Hi, thanks, Peter.
Finally, Thomas Ng is the founder and CEO of Janashtim Innovative Learning, e-learning solutionist. He's in the Institute for Adult Learning, the representative for eCornell. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, everyone.
So could we invite our panelists to talk in general terms about some of the matters that we've already discussed? Perhaps we could start with you, Vanita.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. So collaborative e-learning actually is very interesting, and maybe I just want to share how we moved to e-learning. And Saito, as a university, predominantly serves the underserved. So we are looking at people, students who actually have issues with even owning a device. So COVID really threw us off balance, but it was a real good learning for us. So what we did was we took a 6-step approach, when this happened, and we had to move really fast because we had a lockdown and it was middle of the semester. what we did was we looked at reframing and rethinking some of our capabilities. And I must say what we did, and which I thought was very good, was we asked and we actually listened. A lot of us didn't know what to do. I reached out to Thomas as well as to Daniel a lot of times for help. And we started reaching out to a lot of people to support us in this initiative. And there is always a real good in humanity. Everybody came to help, which was really very good. The next thing that we had to do as an organization is also look at how we manage the integration of technology in what we do, which we didn't really do previously. So that uh, really caused us to put in our strategies, our e-learning frameworks, and to look at the kind of devices that we use, the kind of technology, because a lot of our students come from rural Malaysia and they don't have the newest device. So we had to integrate using the WhatsApp. Sometimes we had a phone call. Sometimes we even had to send them printed notes. So while we used collaborative e-learning, we have an LMS, and students who couldn't get onto it, actually we used other means to help them engage in that process. The next thing that we actually focused on was how do we enhance the student experience? So we looked at how we looked at e-learning, what kind of projects that we used to engage the students. And we really focused on diversity and inclusion. The end state that we wanted after every project was meaningful discussions using the discussion boards. We wanted everybody to have a sense of purpose and belonging. So if they enter a class or if we had a training, we wanted everybody to feel that it was important to be a part of that discussion. And it was really a challenge for us to make that kind of connection online, right? The next thing that we put a lot of time and effort is to build an agile and personalized learning experience and a culture. So I give credit to a lot of our colleagues who spend a lot of time working individually with groups of people, individuals, learners who are very afraid of doing these things online. So they actually worked offline a little bit and then brought them back into that group discussion, which is something that I think a lot of us sometimes forget, and we say, okay, now we're going to have a training session, so let's all get online. We really need to understand our participants and their level of readiness for collaborative e-learning. And the last thing that we did, and while I say it's the last, I think it's actually the most important, is how we want to establish value in what we do, right? And Peter spoke about application of the learning. So we really need to look at a mutually beneficial relationship between the facilitator, between group members. You know, if we break them in small groups, what's the real value and how do they actually apply what they have received or they have learned from that session into what they do. So what we had to do is really look at, once we do group discussions, etc., projects, then actually give them something to do at their home or, you know, in where they live. and then they come back and they take a photo of it and they put it up and they explain really, this is what I discussed with my colleagues and I received value from someone else. So there was a lot of reflective processes that we had to go through. I think what is most important that I believe for collaborative e-learning is the reflective process. I think if we get people to talk about their learning and share their experiences, between the 6 or 7 of us here on the screen, each one of us would have received something different from what Peter has just explained. So I think when we share things like this, we break the barrier between my anxiety, and I realize that I'm not the only one who doesn't understand, or I'm not the only one who's afraid. So to me, the whole throwing Saito into e-learning is the best thing that has ever happened in 2020. And, we have benefited so much from it. And I think what I want to leave with everybody is whatever we do, whether it's traditional learning or whether it's collaborative e-learning, focus on the reflective process of it. I think it's really, really very valuable. And so with that, I'll just pass it on to the other panel members and I'll be happy to take questions later. Right.
Thank you,
Thank
Vanita.
you.
That's
Peter,
great.
back to you.
Loved your emphasis on inclusion in that diverse cohort you're dealing with, and the value of reflection as well. I think that's tremendously important. So I'm sure you'll get some great questions about that from our attendees. Thank you. Daniel, do you want to comment on these points that we've discussed? Oh, we've got no sound from you, Daniel. You don't appear to be on mute, but we're missing your sound. No. No.
That's the beauty of e-learning, Peter.
That is. Daniel, shall we move to Cheng Lian while you sort out your sound problems? Thank you so much. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Cheng Lian, could I invite you to speak, please?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter. Yeah. So I just want to share my experience more from the corporate world. I'm from the corporate world rather than the academic world. So, unlike computer-based learning, which is very much individual, self-paced learning, collaborative learning is about coming together, learning together online. And this mode of training is actually on the increase, at least, I can say at least from the tech sector where I come from. Yeah, so in fact, like what Peter said, I think what we really like about that learning is that the situation where, we all can come together, at least two or more people, we can get together, learn, share knowledge.
Testing 1 2 1 2.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
I can hear you, Cheng Lian, and I think we just heard Daniel there testing his microphone. So it seems like that's good, but please continue. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry. So it is a situation where, the learners get to interact with each other, and then we get to capitalize on each other's ideas and skills. And like what Vinita said, right? Everyone will get different perspective. We learn differently, right? Based on our previous experience. Yeah. So this mode can be either in asynchronized or synchronized mode. Like what Peter has said. So an example of a synchronized mode that actually, take place quite often, in a corporate setting is, example is the collaborative e-learning, where the instructor play an active role in facilitating. So instructor will pop by every now and then, in the breakout rooms to provide the guidance and to moderate the discussion that learners are engaged in. So there's a lot of interaction, active listening, active learning, so to speak. Yeah, so the individual not only learn from their own group discussions, but from other groups as well, right? As each group take turns to, to share the outcome of their discussion, or maybe to even reflect, like what Vinita said, a lot of reflections as well. yeah, to share their problem solving and also to share their case studies if they're working on case studies, right? So I found that, we adults learn better and retain information better by engaging with each other, right? So the value that we find, at least from the corporate world, of this collaborative e-learning is more in the information that's being exchanged. The information being exchanged are constructed and the knowledge is acquired, right? So where we can then go back, when we go back to the workplace, we can then apply it. Yeah, and this also is part of our development, for an individual. So I find that collaborative e-learning is ideal when the learners are working towards a common learning goal, either to solve a problem, to complete a task, or to even create an artifact, especially when they are in different place or even in different time zones. Yeah, so this is my sharing from the corporate world.
That was so interesting, Julianne. Interesting that you're seeing an increase in this, and the collaboration behind collaborative e-learning is where you're saying the greatest value comes from, particularly in working towards a common goal. And I like the point that this could be many different things depending on the course and what's being taught there. Thanks so much for sharing those insights with us. Daniel, we can hopefully hear you. It doesn't look like your video is on at the moment, but please go ahead and share your experiences. Oh, now we've lost your sound. You're on mute. I'm sure we heard you testing your mic, but now we can't hear you again. So maybe we could take a couple of questions while we're sorting out Daniel's technical problems. I know we've got our best people working on it. So we'll take a couple of questions that have come in from our attendees. So here's a question that is quite general about the level of interest in virtual classes. So how do we tackle learners who used to be active participants in physical workshops, but aren't really interested in virtual classes? Could one of our panelists give an opinion on this one? Tackling learners who used to be active in physical workshops, but not really interested in virtual classes.
Can I say something? In fact,
Thomas, please.
Yeah, in fact, this is going to be one of my sharing, and to address your slide on the end game, and also to address also Vinita's point and also Chingman's point on reflection, right? I suppose in this situation, you need to understand why these participants were interested in the physical workshops, right, and try to analyze what it is, right? It could be that the physical workshops had very much better content, and the virtual workshop that you have selected was not as good a quality. That could be a possibility. But let me share with you an experience I had, and this was in the 90s, 1998. I took over as country manager for Asia Brown Boveri in the Philippines. This is a company I had 3 companies under me with 700 employees, and the first thing I realized in the first week, I have to sign a lot of approvals for training requests, and these were quite expensive training, and we are a multinational company, so we actually send people for high quality. And I asked my HR manager, I said, how come so many people are going for training, and how do we determine? And she said, oh, headquarters wants us to spend so much money on training. So, but I felt very uncomfortable because, our best people are being sent away for 2-3 days at a time, and I'm not so sure about the quality of this training. So I said, okay, I tell you what, I'll let the 1-day workshops pass. Anything that's more than 1 day, any person who attended the workshop, when he comes back, I want to have him in a room with 10 people from the company, and he has to tell us what are the 3 things that he learned, and 1 thing he thinks he can apply in the company, right? There's not very much to ask for, isn't it? I mean, you talk about end game. Isn't that what the end game should be? What are you going to do to improve the business from your training, right? You know what happened? After that, there were no applications for training. 0. I'm talking reduced to zero. So I hope that gives you an kind of an insight about what possibly could be the reason, right? So I mean it's an anecdotal thing. I don't think it applies to everybody, but I think that you have to think about, and I have had in the course of 15 years of entrepreneurial, in doing training, many HR managers have accepted to confess to me, said, look, our people are more interested in the venue, the catering, rather than what they actually learn, So they are looking at it as time off from the office kind of thing, right? So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thomas, I think you're right. I think many of the employees go out for training because I think they like one. I think it's to them it's away from work, sort of a relaxation. Two, they got nice food, especially if the training is held in hotels. With good food. And I mean, of course, they like is also the facial, the interaction, the networking. Yeah, which I think a lot of this can also be you can find some of this in networking, especially in networking, right? In online learning as well. Because when it comes to online learning, in fact, my experience is that we get to know each other better than at a physical level. Why I say that is because right after the class, somebody will, if nobody does that, you can always, one of us will just take it up and organize, like a WhatsApp group. And then we start exchanging ideas and we start connecting with each other. So it's in fact a stronger way to network compared to physically, because physically you just say hi and bye, and then how many can you touch? How many can you talk to? Right. So online learning is actually good in the sense that you also build your strong network.
Very interesting.
Okay, I think I'm
Daniel,
ready.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
we've got
your voice
sound for
back.
Daniel.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about this. Yeah, as the sign
That's
says,
okay.
yeah, do all things with kindness. Yeah, and this is actually very important because when it comes to virtual class sessions where we do not see our students face to face, the need for empathy and to be aware of the wellness of our participants is very, very important. It's something that we take for granted when we are in a classroom, but when we're online, it's something that we may forget and focus more on the teaching rather than on the wellness of students. Right. So let me share with you what I'd like to share this morning to take the opportunity. Let me share with you start with one story, 4 points and 3 conclusions. The first story is happened about 15 years ago when I was invited to be a visiting professor in one Thai university. And at the end of the 2-week session, I was told to sit in a computer lab. And the host said to me, Daniel, please look through what we have developed and tell me what you think. And as I went through it, I saw there was a lot of flash animation. The content was very well designed. There was good graphics, and we'll go through the whole process. And at the end of that short session, I said to my host, what you've done here is amazing, and it's much better than what you've done in Singapore. And then she looked at me in the eye and said to me, Daniel, then you tell me why when you talk about the usage of e-learning in NTU, you talk about hundreds of thousands per site, and here we only get a few hundred. And it was there that I started asking, hey, why is that? My colleagues were using simple PowerPoints and some of the basic tools. But here in Thailand, they were using advanced graphics and animation. Why was there a disconnection with the engagement level? As I thought about it, I realized that the answer was actually very simple. Way back on campus, our professors were creating what we call learning activities. They were getting students to get involved, and they needed to go back to the learning system to go to the content to get the information. And each time when they go back and forth and talk to other students, that was when the number of transactions shot up. Right, and there I learned an important lesson that when we want to go into e-learning effectively, especially when students are remote, we need to make sure that number one, we design for learning quality, right? In addition to teaching quality. Many of us are familiar with teaching quality. We use good textbook, good material. But what we forget is to also consider learning quality. When we ask ourselves the question, what can we do so that students will learn more? And so how do we ensure that we have learning quality done correctly? Number one is to make sure that in what we do, the students are first of all a active participant, right? So they are engaged in individual activities of what was shared earlier by my fellow colleagues. Secondly, in addition to individual participant, now you want to go one level higher where they need to work with their group members, their colleagues. So this is where we bring in collaborative. You need participative to become collaborative. Thirdly, we want this to be sustainable. Now, and that means that we need to create a system whereby the students' engagement will increase as they are more participative. And this is done through what we call learning design, whereby we create a learning design where students are active through learning activities. And each time when they do it, we also use what we call peer rating, which, believe you me, increases the level of engagement. Because to peer rate, I need to know enough to rate my fellow colleagues. The last point which I want to mention that's very important is to make sure that this system is teacher or professor or trainer friendly. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that number one, the learning curve for the trainer is not steep to take advantage of the affordances of the system, right? In other words, it's easy, it's intuitive, and they're able to operate it very easily and very quickly. Secondly, teacher friendly also means that the system is robust and trustworthy. It must not fail, right? In other words, like what happened just now, and I doing technology, it works very well, but it does work. It sometimes fumble. I always have a plan B. And a plan B in this case is I use the mobile phone as a backup so that I can still communicate when my laptop fails, right? The third point is this: it must make the trainer work less hard. Now, the feedback that I get from many colleagues, as well as people I meet, is that once they go to e-learning, they find that the workload went up. And in many universities where they are ranked, that impact the time they have for research, right? So we want to make sure that the system, the platform that you use, the professor actually work less hard in a sense that he's able to step back and let students be more involved. And when that happens, you find that, hey, most of the work is not done by the students, rather than by me. In the past, every time a student asks a question, I need to go in and respond. But when we design the learning well, what happens is that when the student give a response, it is other students who respond to that question. And by so doing, the teacher is able to take a step back, observe, and provide feedback or come to a conclusion after the discussion is over. Right. So that is also very important to bear in mind that by using the system to support collaborative learning, the teacher actually works less hard. And when that happens, it becomes sustainable, and he's able to continue using the system in a way that will require more enthusiasm than energy. That's what I could say. Sorry for the little hiccup just now.
Thank you so
Peter,
much.
back to you.
I'm glad we got to hear you finally, and a great emphasis on the importance of systems and processes to enable collaboration and to encourage it. We're getting some great questions in, and here's one that I found particularly interesting. I mean, I've been on calls, video calls, meetings where participants are in their car driving, which is a bit scary. So this question is relevant. Your thoughts, please, on engaging participants, especially Salesforce, who are on the go and can't focus fully in the virtual workshop. So how can we engage people like that, the Salesforce or others who are mobile by the nature of their work? Any suggestions on that from maybe from our corporate participants?
Okay, maybe I can just comment. I think how we make learning possible for salespeople is, we call it mobile learning. It's very much like it's online learning. It's just that they learn through their mobile device, right, instead of laptop. Yeah, and I think it's important while we want to make learning, available to them anytime, anywhere. But I think it's important, like what you say, right? I think they have to be mindful, when is the right time. Like it can be asynchronous, it can be synchronous, but asynchronous is something that they are responsible for, right? You don't learn while you're driving, right? You learn, while I mean, like the bites, the bites of learning, right? You can actually do it in between meetings. But I think the beauty of this collaborative e-learning is actually also the synchronous part of it. I mean, while salespeople is on the go, at night, where there's no entertainment, he or she can always, sign on to synchronous mode, where he can actually then interact with his other, other peer learners, as well as, engage the instructors, right? And that's where they learn better. In fact, I would say that to the earlier question, right, where they say that how do we make those people who likes physical training to love online learning as well? I think one of the rather, I would say that one way is actually to give them time, because it can be very distracting, if they are learning from the office. Because, I think in the office, there's a lot of movements, a lot of activities, and if you are learning from your workspace, you have people coming in, and then people walking around you. So it can be very distracting. So I think it's important that they actually, really focus on the training, maybe work from home for that day, lock themselves in a room, for an hour. Yeah, typically, online learning, you don't go on, the effective one, you don't go on continuously for a day, right? It's it's like in a short period of time, an hour, the most two, and then break, and then you continue again. If there is really, a lot of things that you need to cover in a day. But typically, I would say that, on a per day basis, we will keep to an hour or two. Yeah, so that the individual can concentrate. So likewise, the salespeople, they have very short span, attention span.
Yeah.
They cannot sit for long. That's why they are salespeople. They're up there selling, right? Yeah. So we have to make it, in a conducive environment.
Okay.
Great. Thanks
if I
so
may,
much, gentlemen.
if I may,
Yeah,
if I may,
Dr. Thomas.
Ching Yen, agree with you on one point and maybe offer a contrary view to one of your other viewpoints. Right. The first one is about the fact that people are put under pressure to do e-learning, which is a bit weird because most employers or HR people or department heads have no hesitation to send somebody away 2 days to attend a workshop, right? And like I mentioned earlier, is that the value they get when they come back is very questionable because nobody checks on what they actually have learned or is able to bring value to the company, right? So nobody hesitates. 2 days, fine, it's normal, right? Because the company normally prescribes at least so many days training, But the thing is that if you send somebody on an e-learning module, which takes maybe, I don't know, over 2 weeks, takes 14 hours of time, but they have to do it on their own time, or try to steal time in between, and of course many employees hate that because they have to use almost all personal time to do that, and it's not fair. I think it's not fair. I mean, people may be motivated and passionate about learning, but it's still not fair. So I've actually made some suggestions to some HR managers. I said, look, what you can do is that if somebody completes this program successfully and it is stated that this program needs so many hours of learning, give them an extra day off, add to the vacation leave, because otherwise if you send him for the workshop, you lose a person for a day or two anyway. But somehow this was a no. Nobody actually agreed to this. What to me was kind of weird, kind of a mindset thing, right? And the other thing I want to mention in response to the question and a little bit of a different view from Ching Lian's point is that I actually think that there's too much emphasis or value being placed on synchronous learning and not so much being placed on asynchronous learning. For me, synchronous learning is useful if it's very, very small groups, because otherwise it's somebody talks and a group of people listen. I mean, there's not much kind of, whereas synchronous learning, you can actually then engage the person in finding out what he or she has learned and how to apply, right? And also, if I may take just one more minute to answer a couple of questions that was raised here, is that, you know, in a good collaborative e-learning environment with a good asynchronous kind of interaction with a good instructor, what will happen is the instructor will kind of post on the discussion board, as an example, right? Can you pick a problem that you faced in your work or previous jobs or whatever, and then explain this problem, and then explain how you would resolve this problem better given the module we just completed online, right? So that is so powerful. That means that person has to use a real example from work and then use the learning and see how he would better resolve that thing, you know. And here I hope that answers the question of, you know, whether this is reality or not, this training is reality or not. How more real can that be, right? And then, of course, the other thing about you as a HR person is that if you want to, like what I tried to do in my example, is that you can actually ask your people come back from finish the training, can you just download your discussion board and let me read it? It means you want to know how the person has you know, resolved issues and discuss problems and all that, right? So I think all these things can be really leveraged to provide a very profound return on your investment in training. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Benita, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah. I also wanted to add that I think we need to be mindful. While we need to clock in 80 hours of training a year, whatever companies have, it shouldn't be forced down to the people, right? Just because there's this exciting sales training, it may not fit everybody. I think what we really need to do for the HR people would be maybe spend some time to understand our colleagues. Some people, and understand what is it that they want for themselves. You know, we all have personal goals. We have things that we want to achieve. One is competency, one is self-development, right? So I think sometimes where we have a problem is we prescribe training. We say that everybody in this department, please go for X number of trainings, and we are hoping that they're going to achieve the KPIs that we set for them. Sometimes we put them completely in the wrong direction, right? And I think if people are on the go, and I do this personally, is I listen to bite-sized podcasts, right? Or I listen to this recording. I listen to you, Peter, but I just don't turn on the video. I just listen to it. And that works for me, right? And I can listen to it over and over again. And I think that is what I love about online and e-learning, is that, you know, once I leave the session, I can listen to you 100 times. And I love that, which we can't get, you know, if we go off on a retreat or an away day.
Their attention always wanders, doesn't it? And
That's
it's
right.
nice to be able to come back and say, oh, let me rewind for 15 seconds and just listen to that again. So great example. So just a question that's come in that I thought was interesting too, that an assumption that it's the technology or e-commerce companies that adapt better to collaborative learning because they know technology well. Do you think it's just as easy for more conventional companies to adopt this new normal in learning that makes more extensive use of technology?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think as the Gen Y and the Gen Z, as they become the dominant proportion of workers, those people are very used, right? In fact, that is part of the DNA. It's quite different from us, baby boomers and the Gen X. Is that, you know, they like to do things together. They crave for the recognition that they get because of the contribution. And so for them to work in groups in the more creative manner, it's actually more natural for them than for us or old timers, right? So for them, when we what we learned and observed is that when we create a group activity, there's more energy because there is a need to be accountable, to be aware that people are watching you, and you're watching other people, and when your contribution is being recognized. That is actually a very powerful force for them to be involved, right? And of course, that comes after the initial part of they learning something, so that when they participate, there is value of using what they have gained through prior knowledge and through prior content to be able to participate meaningfully. So the two must come together. They must be given enough information or ammunition so that when they come together, they're able to use that to contribute towards the discussion. Right. So that again is part of the learning design process.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Any other
Peter,
comment
if
on
you
that?
don't mind, can I just share something on this? We
Please.
tried a very interesting project because I started off by saying we are not very tech savvy and we always did things very traditionally. What we did was the first round, of course, the lecturers put up their own content, right? And for the second cohort, we told the students, we tried this with a couple of cohorts. We said, why don't you design, this is the content, why don't you design it the way you think is best? And it was really quite interesting, the kind of videos they embedded. There are certain things that we translated to a local language that when a lecturer is explaining or facilitator, we don't use those things. And they said, if you do it this way, this really helps the students understand better. And we thought that was really very powerful because it came from them and it was a great process of reverse mentoring. We have some colleagues who are over 70. I'm not saying that they're not very good, but they are not as great with technology as the 20-year-old. So we now have clusters of students helping a more senior academic. And this reverse mentoring process actually is working quite well for us, right? Yeah.
That's fantastic experience. Look, I have to say we are nearing the end of the webinar. I, for one, could listen to our panelists all day. There's such great knowledge and insight that we're hearing here. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get to all the questions, but we'll put them in the discussion board. So please engage with that board and see the answers to these questions. Thank you so much to our panelists, Cheng Lian, Daniel, and Vanita for participating today, and Thomas as well. It's been a fantastic session. As with the panelists from the earlier webinars, they'll continue to answer questions and share on the discussion board. So we're grateful for that too, because this HR Masterclass is more than just standalone webinars. And if you need help accessing the discussion board, please reach out to us. And as with the previous webinars, we'll make a recording available on the platform within 48 hours. After this, we'll be launching module 3, critical core skills for the future, which will start with a recorded webinar from Skills Future Singapore, which is a government statutory board there. So last but not least, thank you all for your time and attention today, to our participants, our panelists, and for all the questions that you've raised. We wish you a wonderful and successful day and look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.